Thank you. Thank you for being here, Dan.
Let's
All right.
see. I'm now going to move into my PowerPoint. So you guys a very quick story about this this book, The Conclusion Trap. It started actually from a speech that was given by some people that someone you guys may know, a guy named Rich Sheridan, who's the founder and president of Menlo Innovations in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Rich tells a story about how a gentleman came up to him, president of a company, a moving company, sort of like Allied Van Lines. He said, Rich, I need an iPhone app for my sales team. And Rich said, okay, makes sense. Tell me why you needed an iPhone app for your sales team. He says, well, you know, I built the company by acquiring regional players. And what I'm finding now is that the various regions aren't playing well with each other. They're not handing leads from, let's say, the Northeast to the Southeast or the Southwest or the Midwest or whatever. And one reason, for sure, is that the software at each company stinks. Or let me rephrase that. It's not that they stink, but they don't talk to each other very well. So the interface is really clunky. It's a pain in the neck. It's really difficult for a salesperson in Massachusetts to make a referral to someone in New Mexico. And Rich said, that makes a lot of sense. I can totally understand why you might need an iPhone app, but what I need to do is talk to the users, in which case your salespeople. Guys, the president says, you don't need to talk to the users. I've already talked to them. The software stinks. An iPhone app would make life so much easier. Can we please have an iPhone app? And Rich said, yeah, but this is the way I like to operate. And the guy says, fine, go ahead. So Rich talks to all the salespeople. And what he finds out is that the software does stink, and it is really hard to make a referral from Massachusetts to New Mexico. But what he also finds is that when the salespeople send a referral out of their region, they don't get a commission. And Rich goes back to the president and says, you don't have a technology problem, you have a compensation problem. And the guy says, what do you mean? And Rich says, well, you know, the salespeople are not getting commissions, and so that's why they're not handing things off, because they're salespeople, and no matter how complicated it was, if they had to fax referrals in, they would fax referrals in if they were getting paid to do it. And the guy says, well, yeah, but Rich, I want an iPhone app. And Rich said, fine, but we can't work together. So this was the genesis of this idea, the conclusion trap. What is it that leads us to fall into, to jump to conclusions, to jump to solutions when we really don't understand the problem? All the ideas that I'm going to give you here today are available at the website, theconclusiontrap.com. There's plenty of stuff you can download for free without registering. Infographics, interviews, case studies, the whole schmagegi, so feel free to pick the stuff up there. So let's talk about 3 common traps that I see. And these are just 3 of the most common. There are plenty others that I'm sure you've lived with. But 3 common traps that show you that an organization is in fact about to jump to conclusions. The first one is an investment in technology. And so this story about Rich and the president of the moving company is a perfect example. I need an iPhone app. We need to implement Salesforce. We need an SAP system, whatever it happens to be. That's going to solve all our problems. And the odds are excellent that it's not. The odds are excellent that you've got problems that are much deeper and more pronounced than software is not going to solve it. Another idea that you see is when companies throw money at it. We're going to increase bonuses. We're going to increase salaries. We're going to give spiffs to our retail customers, whatever it happens to be. When you start throwing money at it, generally that's an indication it's not just that the problem isn't just that it's the value that you're providing isn't good enough, but it's that there's something fundamentally wrong, but it has nothing to do with the money. Thirdly, and this one hits home particularly for me because I lived through 4 or 5 of these in my working career, reorganization. We're going to change titles, we're going to change seats, we're going to change organizational structure, and that's going to solve the problem. But the issue is, or the truth is, that you could have an organization that is built along functional silos, and that sometimes works, or a value stream organization, and that sometimes works, or a matrix organization, and that sometimes works. The truth is that there's no right organizational structure. What I can tell you is that your customers don't care what seat you're in, what your title is, or how the company is organized. And if you are just reorganizing, the odds are good that you don't understand the fundamental problem that's leading to the trouble that you're seeing with your customers or your staff or whatever. Normally, I would do a little poll here at this point to see if people have lived through any one of these things where you invest in technology or spend money on stuff or you reorganize. My guess is, given that I've done this talk now quite a bit, that most of you who've lived through at least one, if not all of these band-aids that don't really solve problems, all of these conclusion jumps that don't solve problems. So why do we do this? Well, you guys may remember a couple of years ago, Dan Kahneman came out with his book called Thinking Fast and Slow, for which he won the Nobel Prize. And if you haven't read it, here's the idea. We have two modes of thinking as human beings, fast thinking and slow thinking, which you might have guessed by the title of the book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. He calls it System 1 and System 2 thinking. And here is the money page for you, the money graphic. System 1 thinking is fast, it's unconscious, it's automatic. It's really simple. It's for everyday decisions, and it happens to be error prone. If I said to you, what's 2 plus 2, before you could even stop, you would come up with 4. If I said peanut butter and, your brain would go immediately to jelly. You can't really stop it. And this is a really, really useful way of thinking. If, for example, you're hunting and you hear something that sounds like a rattle of a snake, you're going to jump back, or rustle in the jungle, that might be a tiger, you're just going to run before you try to figure stuff out. So System 1 we use all the time, and it's really important because if you had to make a really thoughtful, mindful decision about how you're going to tie your shoes or what you're going to wear every day, you'd never get out of the house. System 2 is the opposite. It's slow, it's effortful, it's for complex decisions. If I said to you, what's 17 times 314, you would probably need a pencil and paper, unless you're some sort of math savant like Rain Man, but most of us are not, and you would actually have to think through it. It's effortful, it's time consuming, it's reliable. And System 2 is really important and valuable and useful for complex, difficult decisions. The problem we have is when we use System 1 thinking instead of using System 2. And we do this all the time at work because we're rushed, because our colleagues, our supervisors, our direct reports are pressuring us to make a decision quickly because they want to get moving. We do it because we have other things we want to get to and we just want to get this off our plate. And so we say things like, I just need an iPhone app, it's going to take care of everything. You know what? Our sales are down, our customers are unhappy, they don't seem to be able to get through to customer service. Let's just reorganize, because right now we're organized functionally. If we organize by value stream, that's going to make all the difference. Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan, said something that I think really captures the idea. And I'm going to let you read this without me reading it to you. But this idea of a commoditized, what he calls a commoditized idea, to me, this is an iPhone app. This is using Slack in the company to improve responsiveness and communication and coordination. It is a reorganization. It's higher retention bonuses. These are commoditized ideas. They don't show real thought. They're just commodities. And that helps us deal with the limits of knowledge. So I'm advocating that we can take 4 steps to make better decisions, 4 steps to reduce the likelihood that we jump to conclusions. What I'm saying here is that I want you to take 3 steps back, or maybe 4 steps back, before you take 1 step forward. I'm asking you to go slow in order to go fast, or go slow in order to go correct, instead of making a mistake. And I think that if you take advantage of these 4 steps, you're going to end up making better decisions. You're going to avoid jumping into the conclusion trap. What you decide after, what decision matrices or models you want to use, that's entirely up to you. The goal here is to help you slow down so that you can be sure you understand the problem before you make any decisions. So let's work through these 4 steps. By the way, this infographic is available again at the website. You're free to download it. So let's walk through these 4 steps and talk about what it means. The first idea is going and seeing. John le Carré, the spy novelist, said that a desk is a dangerous place from which to view the world. And I've used this quote for years and I've really loved it. And then I saw something that really hit home. This isn't just John le Carré talking, but how do we know it's true? This was a quote from the GE annual report in 2000, either 2001 or 2011. Check this out. Jeff Immelt, the former CEO, was talking about how smart they are at GE. He was talking about how good they are at being able to get into a conference room and be able to solve stuff. Well, that didn't work out so well for GE, did it? Given that they've just dismembered themselves under Larry Culp, who, by the way, of course, is a lean guy. They've dismembered themselves because I think that when they're sitting around the conference table, which, by the way, almost always occurred in some executive office with mahogany paneling and beautiful furniture and china teacups and things like this, they weren't really where the work was being done. So what do we want to do? We want to be able to go and see what's actually happening. We want to understand the facts. So this brings me to this distinction between data and facts. Taichi Ono, who many of you know, of course, he says data is, of course, important in manufacturing, but I place the greatest emphasis on facts. What's the difference? Well, data to me is a 2-dimensional, anemic representation of reality. It's black and white. Data is a spreadsheet. Data is a report. Data is anecdotal stories about what's happening. Facts is what you get by direct observation. So data will tell you, and this actually happened to me when I used to work in sales at ASIC years ago in my career. We knew that the sales, the customer service folks were making a lot of errors in data entry for the orders or order entry. And we were getting a lot of returns, which was expensive. Not only that, it pissed off our customers, the retailers. So we had the data that showed that they were screwing up. And the easy answer would be to say, well, they're not very good. So either we need to A, put them through more training, okay, or B, fire them and hire better customer service people, whatever better means. That's what the data told us, that they weren't doing a good job. But hats off to the management, the leadership team. They didn't go just by the data. They went to the Gemba, they went to the customer service floor, and they watched the customer service folks enter orders. And it turns out, I'm dating myself, of course, this is back in the days of AS400s and blue screens or black screens with green cursors, no graphic interfaces. The way the IT department, they'd made a change in the order entry screens and they moved things around, and it was really complicated to tab over to the various fields and put in the information that needed to be put in. They'd have to tab forward, they'd have to go back, they'd have to go forward again, they'd have to skip pages and go back again. And the setup was terrible. So were they making a lot of errors? Absolutely. But the facts told us that the screens were terrible. The facts told us that they were working in a really complicated environment, which made it almost impossible for them to do the job well. So data is 2-dimensional. Facts are 3-dimensional, full color understandings of reality, not representations of what's actually going on. So of course, where do you get the facts? Well, as my friend says, you go to the crime scene. So if you think about any police show on TV, whether it's CSI or NCIS or anything, the cops don't just sit around, or the detectives don't sit around in the police station talking about the crime. What do? They go to where the crime occurs, they talk to people, they look through the various windows, they look at cameras, security cameras footage, they kind of peer through windows. Can you see this angle? Can you see that? They look for bullet casings. They do all the stuff they need to do to really understand the facts at the site. They don't try to understand it from where they are, sort of like Jeff Immelt. So the first thing you want to be able to do, the first thing to do to slow yourself down is to go to the crime scene and get the information that you need to understand what's happening. Let's see. I see a question from David. He's asking, can I describe the same trap when a deadline is required? What I can say is that when a deadline is there, it tends to push us into this trap. Because David, if you want to say, geez, I'm not really sure if we understand the problem, let's go to the Gemba, let's go to the crime scene, let's watch people do the work for the next hour or the next day, people are going to say, yeah, but we don't have time for that. The deadlines often push us towards skipping this very, very important step. And so we don't understand what our team is going through. We don't understand what they're seeing. We don't understand what they're feeling. We don't understand how their work is being done. So going to the Gemba, which you've all heard about, I'm sure, is really important because it slows us down and gives us an opportunity to get away from this very thin, very anemic, very superficial understanding of what's actually happening. For what it's worth, by the way, quick digression, a dear friend of mine worked for many years in the leadership team at American Express, and they would have people from the leadership team go out to the call centers to understand how customer service works. And as you know, Amex prides itself on their customer service for their card members. And Chris would describe how the leaders would fly from New York, sometimes on a corporate plane, and they fly, whether it was to India or to someplace in a low wage area of the country, say Kansas or Oklahoma or Missouri or something, Mississippi or something like that. And they'd go in for a couple of hours, they'd get a presentation in the conference room, they'd have one of the stars from the customer service team talk about what happened, and then they'd go home and be able to be back in New York before dinner, which is, in other words, another way of saying that they never saw the Gemba. They never really got the facts of how their customer service reps were interacting with their card members. So going to the Gemba, getting the information, getting the facts. One thing that's important to mention, and I know that Edgar Schein has been involved in an ASQ webinar, I think within the last month or 2 months. He wrote a book, of course, called Humble Inquiry. If you were not at the ASQ webinar about that, I'm sure it's been recorded. But the money quote from this book, which I think is really important, is this. And once again, I'm going to let you read this without me reading it for you. If you are going to the Gemba, if you're going to the crime scene in order to get the facts, it's important to remember that when you parachute in or you drive in or you go over to the next building, especially if you are in a higher level in the organization, people are going to be fearful, they're going to be defensive, they're going to be reserved, they're going to be anxious, they're going to be nervous, they think that they might or they may be afraid they're going to get yelled at. It's really important to understand a humble inquiry, understand that you need to make yourself vulnerable and that you're really asking questions so that you can better understand, not so that you can blame. That may be a heavy lift because what I've seen over and over again is that teams don't necessarily feel safe. In nearly every organization I've consulted to, people are afraid that the messenger is going to be shot. They're afraid that if they show the problems, they're going to be criticized or yelled at, or at the very least, it's going to show up in their annual performance review. So be sensitive to the fact that if you're going to the crime scene to get the facts, that you have to work really hard, not just in that moment, but over the course of every day, basically, during the course of the year, that you want to make people, you need to make people feel safe. You need to get them comfortable with the notion that you're going to come by and watch so that you can understand and help them. So does your team actually feel safe enough in order to tell you the truth about what's happening? Let's move on. This is actually my favorite part of the talk. It's about problem framing. So many of you may have seen this quote from Charles Kettering about how a problem well stated is a problem half solved, which is terrific, except that no one says what is a well stated problem. And I think that this creates real difficulties. So I want to talk about a few mistakes, a few common mistakes that people make in framing problems. And similarly, a few ideas about how to frame your problem in a way that will make your problem solving efforts a little more fruitful. So the first thing to look for is what I call the lack trap. So you might see problems like this. Problem is our sales team needs more admin support. The problem is we don't have enough software developers. The problem is I don't have a sales manager I can trust. And take a look at these. These all sound like problems, right? The problem is, I know it's a problem because I say the problem is. The problem is our sales team needs more admin support. But the truth is this is not a problem. This is actually a solution. In fact, all of these are solutions masquerading as problems. We're just being very clever because we're saying, well, the problem is. But the truth is when you say our sales team needs more admin support, the only possible answer here is getting more admin support. What you're really saying is we need more support. The problem, what you're really saying is we need more software developers. What you're really saying is I need a sales manager I can trust, which means I need a new sales manager. I'm going to talk about that last one in just a sec because this one is something that I actually heard from a client, and there are so many problems with this I can hardly start. But the idea here is that instead of saying our sales team needs more admin support because this is a solution, and you know it's a solution because there's only one possible answer to this, only one possible countermeasure, which is getting more admin support. What you really want to do is say, the problem is our sales team spends 10 hours a week on low value administrative scut work. Okay, well, one possible solution is more admin support, sure. One other, you could also say, well, what if the problem is our sales team spends 10 hours a week on low value activities, it could be that we could get new computers or provide checklists or get rid of some of the low value tasks, or ask our customers to do some of those. For example, the way banks have put in ATM machines to enable you to do the work the tellers used to do, or supermarkets now have self-checkout lanes so that they don't need as many checkout folks, and it makes people move through the store more quickly. Same with software developers. The problem saying we don't have enough software developers could rather be said, the problem is our software development is continually in our agile, our sprints continually miss the deadline by 1 week, or by miss the target by 3 days or 2 months or whatever it happens to be. This problem is I don't have a sales manager I can trust. Well, again, this just means I have to get a sales manager I can trust, but significantly, I don't even know what that means. Trust in what way? Is the sales manager doesn't come in on time, doesn't make proper phone calls, is stealing from the company? I don't really know what this means, and how can you possibly start to solve this problem if there's no specificity? Which of course brings me to the next idea about generality versus specificity. The problem is we have too much staff turnover in the company. Well, that sounds great, except, I mean, it's legitimate, although I don't really know what too much means. Is too much if you work in a fast food company business, if you're at McDonald's, too much is something like over 100%. If you work at at Google, too much might be 5%. But more significantly, think about how much more effective your problem solving would be if you said, not we have too much staff turnover, but if you said, the problem is we have 7% or 17% staff turnover among employees in their first 3 years within the marketing department. Okay, so now we're talking about younger employees, we're talking about a specific department, and we have a specific number that we can use to compare it to other departments in the company. Or imagine you had, instead of saying we're not meeting customer delivery expectations, if you said the problem is customer deliveries or deliveries to customers across the country of heavy products typically is 3 days late, or deliveries of fragile products are broken 15% of the time, or something like that. We want to be as specific as possible because when you are very general, we don't really know where to start in solving the problem. And that leads us, when we're under time pressure, to jump to solutions that we don't really understand. Oh, we're not meeting customer delivery expectations. Let's just outsource everything to FedEx. Well, maybe that's not the issue. Okay, let's move on. Do you actually have the right subject in your problem statement? And I want you to consider these three. Only 1% of our greenbelts do a second project. There's a very large medical device manufacturer. They're incredibly proud of the fact that a huge percentage of their employees, something like 95%, do a greenbelt projects, but only 1% of them do a second project. But notice the focus of this is on the greenbelt. It's on the people who started the program. Notice how the second problem puts the focus, shines the light on the managers. The managers are only providing 30 minutes per week. Now that may mean, and the first one might mean that our greenbelts don't really care. They're just doing this because they want some sort of credit or a salary raise. The second one may indicate that the managers have their incentives are misaligned. I don't know, but perhaps we're not giving them the ability, we're not allowing them to create time for the employees to do it. Or if you said our company only completes 10 black belt projects each year, maybe that says that the company focus is not really on continuous improvement, but it's on something else. It's on cost reduction, or it's on improved customer service, or it's on maximizing share price. And so we can start looking at what the leadership team says and what they do on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis in order to motivate people to do more improvement projects. I'm not saying that one of these is right and one of these is wrong, but rather that this changing the subject changes the focus and the launch of your problem-solving activities. In a similar way, do you have the right measurement? Take a look at these ideas. We're not as innovative as our competitors, or we only bring one new product or service to market each year, or 5% of our revenue comes from products developed in the past 3 years. So the first one, I don't even know how you measure innovation. So you hear companies, leadership teams saying, oh, we're not as innovative as our competitors, but how are they measuring it? Is it the number of awards you win? The number of awards you win by trade magazines? Is it the number of awards you get from some sort of industrial society? How about we bring only one new product to service to market? Well, maybe you're getting you're measuring the wrong thing, because in this case, or rather, if we look at it this way, maybe you've got tons of ideas. Your employees are as innovative as anyone else, but everything gets killed in committee because any new idea has to pass through 6 committees with increasingly difficult barriers or hurdles to get over to prove their worth. And so things get strangled in the crib. Or what if you say 5% of our revenue comes from products recently developed? That's one measure of innovation. So maybe though the issue is with the pricing and the product, pricing and the promotion and the positioning of the products. It has nothing to do with how innovative you are, but rather you don't know actually how to value the new product or service. So when you change the way you measure your innovations, it changes the way you start thinking about solving the problem. And then the last idea that I want to present in this section is, are you using the right language? Does your language set the right trajectory? Consider these two very, very similar issues. In 1971, President Nixon declaring a war on drugs, and in 2017, Trump declaring a public health emergency. Basically, you're dealing with the same kind of problem. While the drugs themselves were different, of course, you have the same basic problem, which is citizens abusing drugs and as a result becoming sick, dying, being led into crime. You're looking at destruction of community and families. Nixon declared a war on drugs, which leads you to countermeasures like soldiers, barbed wire, military usage, helicopters. You're looking at napalm in Colombia and so on. Public health emergency leads you to countermeasures like counselors, hospitals, healthcare workers. And so when just by changing the words you use, it leads you in some way to think about different kinds of countermeasures. And that's really, really important. The words you use matter. And it's important for you to choose the words carefully, because if you don't, you're going to lead unconsciously. You're going to lead people to down one road versus a different one. So let's talk about thinking backwards. Thinking backwards is my way of talking about starting to identify some root causes. Most of you are probably familiar or may know Kaoru Ishikawa, professor of engineering in Japan, and he came up with the fishbone. There are two things I want to say about the fishbone. If you don't know what a fishbone is, we can talk more about it later on, or you can Google it because there's all kinds of information, but since you're part of ASQ, I'm sure you know what it is. It's important to think about this not as a straitjacket, and people often do. Well, we have to go through all 6 of these, and these are the only 6 categories we can use. But rather think about it not as a straitjacket, but as training wheels, as a support, as a way to facilitate the brainstorming process to identify the potential causes of a problem. Some of you, this was actually an issue that I worked on with one of my clients. Their biggest customer was Amazon, and Amazon had just reduced the amount of time. Instead of delivering in 4 days, it had to be done in 3 days. That 25% reduction in time to pick, pack, and ship the product was going to cause them to get hit with charges. And so we ended up going through an entire assessment like this, and this is only a partial fishbone because there's only so much room on the page. But I wanted to show you this because what we ended up doing with all of things, all the ideas we had, we did something that I thought was very helpful for folks, and that is this. We started to modify it by looking at the major causes, the major contributing factors, the somewhat important contributing factors, and the minor contributing factors. And this was valuable because when you have a really elaborate, well fleshed out fishbone, which I suppose makes it a fish and not a fishbone, but once it's really well fleshed out, it can be overwhelming. And so to help people sift through all of the issues and say which are the ones we want to focus on first, it's useful to just categorize them so that people have a prioritized hit list of what they want to start working on. So again, the notion here is, and by the way, it's important to remember that you might want to get rid of some of these categories. If this was a fishbone for something personal, for example, or maybe problems with teamwork, maybe you have psychology in here, or something like that, or leadership style. We don't necessarily need these classic 6 categories. 5 whys, some of you, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and this is all leading to something really cool that I want to introduce. But the 5 whys, Shigeo Shingo, I think, said it really well, where he talked about the barrage of whys and how it helps you pierce the clouded veil created by the status quo. So almost all of you, I'm guessing, have seen the classic one about the machine that breaks down because there's no filter to keep the metal cuttings out of the machine. But I want to show you another one that I thought was really good to help you see how it can be used in a non-manufacturing environment. And this, although it's not, I did some research on this, it's not 100% accurate because there were some other issues that came into this. It actually captures the spirit of the investigation the Park Service did. So this has to do with the Park Service deteriorating because harsh chemicals are used to clean it. And they needed the chemicals for cleaning because of all the bird poo. And why did they have so much bird poo? Because there was a lot of spiders, and of course birds eat spiders. And why were there so many spiders? Because the spiders feed on gnats and other sort of insects that are drawn to the monument at dusk. And why do we have so many gnats? It's because the monument was lit just around dusk to make it look good for tourists, but in the meantime, it attracted local insects. What they found was that when they lighted it an hour later, after dusk, they found that they could avoid the problem of having too many insects, which reduced the number of spiders, which reduced the birds, which reduced the bird poo, which meant fewer chemicals to clean the monument. Now, a couple things to remember if you don't know this already, that if you're doing a 5 whys, you can't end with blaming a person. You can't say that Sarah screwed up, because the next why would be, why did Sarah screw up? What is it about the system? What is it about the process? What is it about the environment that enabled her to make that kind of mistake and not have it be caught? Similarly, you can't end with, well, the standard work wasn't followed, because that always leads to, well, just train people better. Well, why is it that the standard work was being ignored, or why was the standard work so difficult to follow? And the last thing to look out for is, and where people often go wrong, is that it's too easy to start looking at multiple lines of inquiry. You want to go deep on one problem rather than listing 5 different problems. Well, the 5 whys leads me to Sarah screwed up, and standard work wasn't followed, and the machinery broke down very often, or something like that. We want to just stick with the machinery breaking down, or we want to stick with Sarah, with the environment allowed Sarah to mess up. How come, and how come it wasn't caught? I have to say, in the last year, have moved from using 5 whys and fishbones to something called cause mapping. You'll notice down the lower left half of your screen, lower left corner of the screen, there's thinkreliability.com, and I owe all of this to this company. They do wonderful training work. And the idea here is that rather than using a fishbone, we can look at and we can start to create a map, looking at basically tying 5 whys and fishbones together. We can look at multiple contributing factors with multiple problems at one time by creating a map. One of the things that's really important here is you'll notice all these and conditions. This is very useful. For example, if you had a fire destroying a building, you don't just have a fire, you have to have heat and fuel and oxygen in order to create this problem. If you miss any one of these 3, you're not going to have a fire outbreak, an outbreak of fire. And so this is really useful, this kind of thing, in order to give you a more holistic understanding of what goes wrong. They have a wonderful series of posters you can download. For example, you may think the Titanic sank just because it hit an iceberg, but it turns out it was a lot more complicated than that. And there are a lot more issues, contributing factors, and there are many other places other than avoiding the iceberg or having more lifeboats that could have helped the situation. So the cause maps are incredibly useful. This is a company that does software consulting, and this is a really neat, simple cause map that they did to explain why they're so slow in serving their customers. And I'll just let you scan through that for a few seconds. Here is a cause map that one of my coaching students made. He works at a company that makes windshields for OEM windshields for automobiles, and you'll notice over on the left, the problem is they're not meeting the target efficiency of 85%. And why not? Because they're not producing parts. And then you'll notice there are 3 possible options here. Is it because of the poor material quality, or because the materials are unavailable in the assembly cell, or because the associate's not in the cell? Those are the 3 reasons why they're not producing enough parts. And then you can see, if you roll the tree backwards, what leads to why might we run out or have these problems, why the associate might not be in the cell, or why the raw material is not available, or why the quality isn't any good. And I have found that rather than going through the 2 steps of fishbones and 5 whys, that this whole idea of cause maps is incredibly powerful in really giving you an exhaustive, thorough understanding of not only all the contributing factors, but all of the different problems that those contributing factors lead to. And as you can see here, this guy has the or factors and the and factors included. So I want to finish up with one last thought before leaving time, 15 minutes for Q&A, which is this wonderful quote by the former journalist, the late journalist, not former journalist, H.L. Mencken, that for every complex problem, there's a solution that's clear, simple, and wrong. And so what I would suggest is that any problem that has persisted for more than a week or something like that at your company must be complex, otherwise you would have solved it. And any solution that seems clear and simple is most likely wrong. So you want to slow down in order to speed up. 3 steps back before you go 1 step forward. So with that, I'm going to once again tell you that the conclusiontrap.com, the website, is where you can download all kinds of information, ancillary and additional information, articles that I've written, interviews I've done, and so on, plus infographics and whatnot. Workbook is in there as well. And here's how you can contact me. And with that, We have 15 minutes to answer questions, Q&A, have any sort of discussion that works for you.
Boy, that was really good. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I know in my experience, Dan, the 5 whys, sometimes it can be, you can miss whole branches. So
Yeah.
it seems like it works if you use both together. I mean, can you talk about going deeper into secondary causes, for instance, that way?
Well, I do. Your point, Manny, is absolutely correct. I think with 5 whys, it's really easy to miss stuff, and I think also it's deceptively difficult. I can't tell you the number of times I personally, plus other people I've coached, have gone into logical loops where you end up saying it's broken because it doesn't work because it doesn't work, or you start expanding into things like, well, it doesn't work because people aren't paid enough, and they're not paid enough because the American economic system is built on extracting as much value from workers. And what we really need to, and why is that? It's because we are a capitalist society, and now we're out of anything that can be possibly useful for understanding why this one particular process is broken. So the notion of using the 2 tools together, the 5 whys and the Fishbone, I think is great, because the Fishbone can give you a comprehensive set of causal factors and then you can drill down and explore each of those factors with a 5 why. And of course, just to make it clear, as you well know, Manny, and many of you know, 5 whys isn't necessarily 5. It could be 3 whys, it could be 2 whys, it could be 11 whys. But I think the Fishbone gives you the ability to it gives you a laundry list of stuff that you want to explore. So you don't fall into the trap of missing stuff just using the 5 whys. And again, that's where I happen to like cause mapping quite a bit. And to the extent that you guys are leaders at your companies, I like to think of cause mapping as being a little more advanced. For people who I think are just getting into this, if you're leading a team that's relatively new at this kind of work, then I think it's a good idea to start with Fishbones and 5 whys. The other nice thing about a Fishbone, of course, is that it's more graphic, it's more visual, it's easier to get people to join in and help structure the brainstorming sessions so that people stay sort of focused on one of the 5 or 6 categories that you have on the main bones of the fish.
One of the things I like too is mind mapping too. It's the free form thing that some people seem to really like it compared to Fishbones. It's weird. I can't figure it out. Some people like one version over the other, and I can't predict the behavior.
Yeah, I think it's as with so many other things, it's very situational. You need the right tool for the job, and sometimes you do need something more formalized and more structured. I have struggled with mind mapping because for problem solving when I'm leading teams, because I find that people can be all over the dish as opposed to being a little more focused. And if you get 10 people in a room, you could be mind mapping for a good long time and have hundreds of post-it notes, and trying to sift through those could be really time consuming. Whereas by providing a little bit of a framework with a Fishbone, it provides the opportunity for us to say, yeah, all that other stuff's kind of interesting, but let's stick to these 6 categories or these 5 categories. And so we don't end up with something like, well, the problem is the American capitalist system. We need to change that and think about something more Scandinavian or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think my 3rd grade teacher gets a little bit of the blame too. Just saying.
Who else has got a question? How else can I help flesh this out or touch on something that I haven't covered before?
So with the Fishbone, the 5 whys is not needed. Okay, the Fishbone diagram contains multiple 5 whys branching off from each category of the Fishbone diagram. Okay.
That's Marco, that's an interesting point. And I have to say that I have wrestled with that personally. I thought, well, if you're doing a Fishbone, do you really need the 5 whys? So I totally get where you're coming from. What I have found, and this could just be me as a coach or maybe just the way my own brain works, what I found is that it's really hard for people to get into the tertiary levels of a Fishbone. They're really good at the first level, right? Environment or people, and then one causal level of causality. But usually when you get past the 2nd level of that, people kind of peter out. They kind of run out of, it's hard for them, and I don't know if it's a visual thing or what, but it's hard for people to say, well, why, as you go into the details of your Fishbone. It's each branch of the fish. So if you're able to do that, that's awesome, and I could totally learn from you. But I found that by sort of separating it out, letting people get to say level 1 or level 2 in a fishbone, and then saying, okay, now let's do a 5 whys, and let's go deeper into why is it that in the case of that Amazon thing, for example, why is it that we're only manufacturing this key part once per week? Let me do a 5 why on that, because I know I could say, look, let's manufacture more than once per week, and that's useful, but I really want to understand why. And going through that on a fishbone, somehow people kind of get stuck. But Marco, your mileage may vary, and hats off to you if you're able to get people to go 3 and 4 levels deep on a 5 why.
Katie was talking about the holistic approach of cause mapping. And the question was, do you find it more or less likely to find possible overlapping causes? And how do you prioritize accordingly?
I have, in my experience, Katie, I found that people do find overlapping causes, which is not a bad thing, right? You may find that there's one cause that contributes to 2 different problems, or 2 different, or it manifests itself or has a negative impact in 2 different areas farther downstream. And how do you prioritize? I would say that you prioritize in a way that you would basically in the way you would normally do things, like look for the easiest high impact things, and you look for the hard high impact things, and you don't even bother with the things that are really impossible. And the one nice thing, though, I would say about the cause mapping is that as you go farther to the right in a cause map, generally speaking, you're getting deeper into let me try this again. The deeper you go into it, the earlier you are getting into in terms of time, and the cheaper and easier the intervention becomes, because you're getting in at the ground floor essentially. So you could imagine if you're building a house, if you can use better steel or better wood on day 1 when you're framing it, you're going to have fewer problems than if you try to fix it once the house is sort of rickety after it's been built. Simplistic example, and I apologize, but you get the idea. So the deeper you go into it, the more likely it is you'll have a good outcome for relatively less money and less time.
Great.
Ricardo,
Okay.
does 5 whys have to have 5 whys? And Ricardo, absolutely not. Could be 3, could be 9, could be 11. It's really a mindset, I think, Ricardo, the way to think about it. As you coach people, it's a mindset. You want to teach people, hey, listen, I want you to not take the first easy answer. I want you to think more deeply about what's going on. Adriano, I'm glad you caught that idea, the introduction of the and the or, because it does get lost in the fishbone diagram, right? You do need to be able to see this only matters when it's combined with this other thing, because that means all I have to do is get rid of one of those problems, not both of them. Or I shouldn't say problems. I only have to get rid of one of these causal factors, not both of these causal factors. Speaking of using language appropriately, right?
It's like the discussion between precision and accuracy sometimes.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. We have a few more minutes. I just want to go back, Adriano, the idea that idea of the and the or is really, really useful. And when I was coaching folks at the Ohio State program, the MBOE program, they were doing the cause maps. They found that incredibly useful. Like that slide I showed about the guy who is trying to figure out why they're not hitting their output target on windshields. To be able to say it's either A or B or C, either the associate's not there, or the raw material isn't there, or the raw material quality isn't right, they're defectives. That really helped him think more holistically, more comprehensively about all the possible contributing factors in a way that he didn't fully grasp when we were doing fishbones. I want to thank you all very much for giving me your time and attention for the last hour. It's an hour of your life. Time is the only non-renewable resource, and you will never get this hour back. So I'm hopeful that it was valuable for you and useful. And again, I want to emphasize that it's very easy, especially when you're in the continuous improvement world, ASQ. It's really easy. Yeah, I do this all the time. Yeah, of course I look at root causes, but what I have found, especially with ASQ folks who really do understand 5 whys, they really do understand the importance of going to the crime scene or going to the Gemba. They really do understand the idea of fishbones. That the problem framing is a place where they often, again, because you're quality professionals, where you often go awry. I just finished working with a client who said, yeah, you know what, we were doing this class actually, and they said, yeah, you know, it astonishes me, just yesterday we came up with, well, what we have to do is more training. That's the problem. That's why we're having this defective. And it is so easy to fall into the, some more training, that's going to fix the problem, because of course they're not following procedure, so we have to train them. So even within the ASQ community, we kind of goof up a lot. We fall into these habits of blaming the training or a lack of training or people not being careful. And that's just not good enough. And starting to reframe it, starting to think about how else you could frame it, gives you different perspectives on the problem. And whichever you choose, however you want to frame it, is totally fine. But I would encourage you to take any problem you have and frame it 3 or 4 different ways, just to see what happens, just to see how it changes your perspective on the problem. And then again, whatever you choose to do, hats off to you, go at it. But by looking at it from 4 different angles, I think it gives you a more robust understanding of the problem you're dealing with.
Dan, I want to say thank you for taking the time. I know we had a couple of misfires getting to this point, and you know, but like true professional, you rolled right through it all, and here we are now at the end of the day. So thank you. Really gotten a lot of great comments, and I'm just going to echo them all. Thanks for your time and your insights.
Thanks to all of you guys. Have a wonderful, today's only Monday. Have a wonderful week and stay safe. Cheers.
All right, folks. See you all next month. And it's David Hicks and Dave Rosardo is going to be in March as well. So keep an eye out for all of that, folks. Otherwise, have a great evening. You've got lots of ways to spend your time. Really do appreciate you spending it with us for the last hour. Bye now.